And then, the voice message, the one that made my stomach flip. $5 million for the beach house. He laughed, using glaring height. All thanks to you being gone. For a second, I honestly thought he was drunk and trying out some sick joke. That house wasn't just any house. It was my grandmother's place on the California coast. The one she left to me in her will. The one property I knew for a fact had my name, and only my name, on the deed. While the rest of the crew celebrated finishing a long day of work, I stood alone on the deck replaying his words, listening to the ocean crash against the hull, while my brother bragged about turning my inheritance into his personal jackpot. I called him. No answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. I pulled up our old emails, the scanned will, the property tax notices, every single document I'd carefully saved, all of them with my name printed in black and white. $5 million. A house I never agreed to sell. A brother who waited until I was trapped in the middle of the ocean to pull it off. I didn't know it yet, but the moment I stepped off that ship, the people peering into my walls were about to discover something I hadn't counted on. And what they found would turn his little victory speech into the start of a criminal case. By the time the ship docked and I made it onto a red-eye back to California, I'd memorized every line of my grandmother's will all over again. To my granddaughter, Megan Hayes, I leave her Laguna Beach house in full. I repeated it in my head on the plane, through security at John Wayne Airport, all the way to the rental car lot. The world looked wrong when I pulled out onto the road. Palm trees, sunshine, people in flip-flops. While I was still half frozen from Alaska and half numb from what my brother had said. The drive down to Laguna felt shorter than I remembered. My GPS chirped the turn, and my heart started pounding before I even saw the place. The house sat on the hill like it always had, only now it was wrapped in plastic sheeting and construction fencing. A dumpster sat in the driveway, overflowing with broken drywall. For a second, I thought I had the wrong address, because seeing my grandmother's porch buried under piles of lumber and toolboxes messed with my head. I parked crooked in the street and walked straight up to the temporary gate. A guy in a hard hat looked up from his clipboard. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm the owner of this house. Why are you tearing it apart?" He gave me the kind of look people reserve for crazy customers. "The owners of the Parkers," he said. "They hired us to open up the back wall, add a deck. We've already pulled the curtain." My mouth went dry. "No," I said. "This house belongs to me. My name's on it." Before he could argue, a black SUV pulled up behind my car and a gray-haired man climbed in, both dressed like they'd come from a casual run. They stopped when they saw me standing at the gate. "I'm guessing you're Megan," the man said carefully. "We're the Parkers. We bought this place from your brother." Hearing it out loud felt like getting punched. "You paid him," I managed. "How much?" $5 million, the woman answered quietly. "He said you wanted to sell to fund some big environmental project. He showed us the power of attorney, the sale contract, everything." I pulled my phone out with shaking hands, opened the folder I'd been staring at for 2 days straight, and held up the screen. "This is my grandmother's will," I said. "This is the grantee transferring the house to me 7 years ago. Property tax notices, insurance, all. You see that name? That's me, not my brother." The man frowned and dug into his leather folder, pulling out a thick stack of papers. Purchase agreement. Power of attorney with my name, typed neatly above a signature that looked almost like mine, but not quite. A notarization stamp from Los Angeles. "We took these to the county when we filed for the renovation permit," he said slowly. "The clerk there thought there was a glitch because every record in the system had your name on it, not your brother's. We figured it was some database lag. We just left, assuming it would update once the sale recorded." asked how many fake tears my mother shoved on top of me. The woman swallowed. Our attorney's on his way, she added. If what you're saying is true, we're victims too. 10 minutes later, a sedan pulled up, and a man in a suit stepped out, introduced himself as their real estate attorney, and spread both sets of documents across the hood of his car. Theirs and mine. He compared signatures, dates, recording numbers, then looked up at us with an expression that made my stomach drop. This isn't a glitch, he said. Your brother sold a house he never owned and forged every bit of authority to do it. We need to call the sheriff's department. Right now. I listened as he dialed, gave my brother's name, the address, the dollar amount, and the words real estate fraud to the dispatcher. Standing there in the driveway, staring at the place I'd grown up visiting on weekends, I realized the moment my brother bragged about that $5 million, he'd crossed a line he couldn't joke his way back from. And as the attorney recited the case details into the phone, I had no idea that on the other end of that call, a detective was already pulling up my brother's social media and deciding exactly how to bring him in. The detective who called me that afternoon sounded calm in the way people sound when they're used to bad news. She introduced herself as Detective Marisol Vega from the Orange County Sheriff's Department and asked if I could come down to their station to give a full statement. By the time I sat across from her in a small interview room, the Parker's attorney had already emailed over scans of every forged document my brother had used. Detective Vega clicked through them on a monitor like she was scrolling a shopping site, but her jaw tightened a little more with each page. Walk me through this from the beginning, she said. So I did. I told her about my grandmother, about the weekends at the beach house, about the grand deed in my name, about the messages on the boat off Alaska and the $5 million flex. I pulled up my cloud folder again, showed her the will, the deed, 7 years of property tax bills. Every official record lists you as sole owner, she confirmed. Your brother was never on title, never on the mortgage, nothing. For him to sell, he had to fabricate this power of attorney and that signature. She leaned closer to the screen. It's close, but it's not yours. She asked questions the way good reporters do, slow and precise. Had Logan ever talked about money problems? Had he ever used my name to get credit? Had he ever signed anything for me before? Every memory I tried to shove into a dark corner came crawling back out. The time my favorite camera got stolen, but I later saw it on his eBay history. The way he always needed just one more loan to cover a temporarily frozen investment. The way our dad would bail him out and then tell me I'd understand if I had kids of my own someday. When we were done, Detective Vega turned her laptop on. You should see this, she said. On the screen was my brother's social media profile, a highlight reel of exactly how fast he burned through money that wasn't his. There he was, 2 nights ago, grinning in his brand new sports car with the caption, "Beach House Money is different." Another clip had him at a blackjack table in Las Vegas, chips stacked high, the text on the video reading, "When your sister saves the planet and you cash out." He tagged his location in half of these, she said. He makes my job very easy. She stood up, grabbed a folder, and nodded toward me. I'm going to step out and make a call. You can stay here if you want. I sat there staring at the frozen image of my brother twisting the camera with a glass of champagne, while my name sat on every legal document he tried to bury. On the other side of the wall, I could hear the detective's voice flattened and professional talking as she spoke softly about it. A few minutes later, she came back, set her phone on the table, and hit the speaker button. The line rang twice before she picked up. Hello? My brother's voice, casual and annoyed. Mr. Hey, Detective Vega said. This is Detective Marisol Vega with the Orange County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling regarding the recent sale of the property in Laguna Beach for $5 million. There was a pause, then a laugh I knew too well. Look, I already told everyone. My sister's fine. She's off saving relations or whatever. She signed the paperwork. Vega glanced at me, then back at the phone. Her voice stayed deep. Logan, I need you to listen to her. Based on the evidence we have, you sold the property but never owned, using forged documents and a falsified power of attorney. And this means you are a suspect in an ongoing fraud investigation. The music in the background is end cut off, like someone had hit stop on a playlist. Are you serious right now? He snapped. Over a house? Over $5 million in felony real estate fraud, she replied. Authorities in Las Vegas have been notified. Do not leave your current location. He started to argue, his voice rising, but she ended the call with one last sentence that didn't sound like a request. Sir, the next time your phone rings, it won't be a warning. She hung up and looked at me. He's at a hotel off the strip, she said. Security cameras, credit card receipts, geotagged videos. We know exactly where he is. I pictured him in some penthouse suite, pacing with that same disbelief he'd had when our grandmother first told him the house was mine, not ours. Somewhere in Nevada, officers were already moving toward his room, and by the time they reached him, I'd be on my way back to the beach house he'd never expected I'd fight for. 2 days after Detective Vega's call, she phoned again to tell me it was official. Hotel security in Vegas had watched my brother stroll through the lobby in designer sunglasses, trading high fives with his friends, and then watched deputies step out of an elevator and walk straight toward him. By the time they reached his floor, he was apparently on the phone with someone complaining about overzealous cops. He didn't get to finish that sentence. Hearing those details didn't make me happy, exactly. But there was a dark, quiet satisfaction in knowing he finally couldn't talk his way out of something. That feeling lasted about 15 minutes until my dad called. What are you doing to your brother? Was the first thing out of his mouth. No hello. No are you okay? Just that. I took a breath and told him, as calmly as I could, that Logan had been arrested because he sold a $5 million house he didn't own and forged my name to it. He made a mistake. My dad shocked. We don't throw family in prison over a mistake. I stared at the floor of the half-bedded living room while he talked. Drywall dust floating in the sunlight like snow. Dad, this isn't a broken vase, I said. He lied to strangers. He lied to the county. He lied to you. He took my name and my grandmother's house and used them as poker chips. My dad's voice cracked just enough for me to hear how afraid he really was. He'll fix it, he insisted. He always fixes it. Except he never did. Everyone else fixed it. That night, I met with the partners at a coffee shop down the hill. They looked older than the first day I seen them by the construction fence. Our attorney says the sale will probably be voided, Mr. Parker said, fingers wrapped tight around his mug. The title was never your brother's to sell. We'll likely get most of our money back from escrow, but the part he already burned. He trailed off. His wife nodded toward me. If you want to redo the house your way, keep some of what we started. We'd be honored, she said. We don't blame you. We know who lied to us. Their generosity hit me harder than any angry voicemail from a relative. They had every right to be furious at my whole family, and they were sitting here trying to make sure I didn't feel guilty on top of everything else. weeks, gone in a blur of luxury and risk. We also have former associates coming forward, she continued. A man who says Logan forged his name on investment paperwork. A neighbor he manipulated into writing a supportive letter about selling his house. An ex-girlfriend who has him on recording, bragging about waiting until you were out of the country. The pattern is clear. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A cousin I barely talked to had texted. I heard what you're doing to Logan. Family over money. Remember that. I flipped the screen over. You're going to hear that a lot, Jordan said quietly, like she'd seen this movie before. But this isn't about money. It's about someone who thinks the rules don't apply to him until a courtroom proves they do. Later that afternoon, I met the ex-girlfriend in person. Jasmine walked into the conference room in jeans and a hoodie, looking more tired than dramatic. She set her phone on the table and played a voice message I'd never heard before. My brother's voice filled the room, smug and buzzing with excitement. She's gone for weeks, he was saying, out chasing ice and climate stuff. By the time she gets any real Wi-Fi, escrow will be done. I'll have flipped Grandma's shack for $5 million, and we'll be on a beach somewhere that isn't this overrated. The casual contempt in his tone for the house, for my work for me, did something to my spine. It wasn't surprise, it was clarity. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a plan. That night, back at the beach house, I walked through the shell of what used to be my grandmother's living room, careful not to trip over coiled wires and tools. My voicemail was full of relatives telling me to think about Dad and not ruin Logan's life over a misunderstanding. I thought about the Parkers dipping into their retirement, about Jasmine losing years to someone who saw her as a fraud, about the neighbor across the street who'd signed a letter because she believed a lie about me, needing the money for my work. I sat on the bare plywood where a couch used to be, and finally understood something I'd been dodging since that first message on the phone. This wasn't just about getting my house back. It was about deciding whether I was going to keep cleaning up my brother's messes for the rest of my life, or draw a line he couldn't step over without consequences. When Detective Vega called to confirm the preliminary hearing date, I didn't hesitate. I'll be there, I told him. I'll tell the court exactly what he did, even if I'm the only one in my family willing to say it out loud. The morning of the trial, the courthouse looked like a media circus. News vans lined the street, reporters clustered on the steps, and strangers held up phones, whispering, "That's her, the sister," as I walked past. Someone had turned our disaster into Huertan's beach house brother, a feed full of my brother's old brag videos and commentary about whether I was a traitor or a hero. Inside, Logan sat at the defense table in a navy suit, cleaned up but still wearing that familiar tilt of his chin. When he saw me, he mouthed, "You didn't have to do this," like I'd chosen this over something trivial. The judge read out the charges: grand theft, real estate fraud, forgery, and he answered not guilty to every count. Jordan Kim's opening was quiet. She walked the jury through the simple story: a house deeded solely to me, a brother with a trail of failed schemes, a forged power of attorney, a $5 million wire, and 8 weeks of spending that looked exactly like what it was: a man celebrating a crime. The defense tried to muddy it, talking about family understandings, cultural expectations, painting me as the globe-trotting sister who left the real work to her older brother. Then the witnesses started. Daniel Parker described working for decades in Texas for a dream of retiring by the ocean. How Logan sold him a story about a devoted sister wanting to fund her projects, and how it felt to discover every legitimate record had rigged, not his. Caleb Foster testified about a previous venture where his signature appeared on documents he'd never seen, and how Logan vanished when regulators came. Mrs. Martinez, my grandmother's neighbor, told the jury how Logan knocked on the door of his jail Grandma's shack for 5 mil before I had real Wi-Fi. It wasn't a slip. It was a blueprint. When Logan testified, he leaned hard into being the misunderstood eldest child, claiming he thought the house was a family asset and that I knew about the sale. He talked about managing things while I chased passion projects. Jordan let him talk, then hit him with his own posts, bank statements, and that smug beach house money hits different video. Under pressure, something snapped and he finally muttered, "On paper, it's her name, sure, but she wasn't using it. I took what should have been partially mine anyway." The room went still. When it was my turn, I told the jury about my work and the house, how I hadn't agreed to sell, hadn't signed anything, and how my brother had used my name as a weapon to rob strangers and then pretend it was a misunderstanding. I didn't talk about being hurt. I talked about patterns and choices. If I hadn't pushed this, I said, he would have done it again to someone else. The defense tried to make me sound unforgiving, asked if I regretted going this far, but I kept coming back to the same answer. He crossed a line, and I refused to pretend he hadn't. When closing arguments ended, Jordan's measured and relentless, the defense's full of reasonable doubt and family matter. The jury filed out to deliberate. Logan glanced back at me as the bailiff led him away, eyes full of blame, as if I'd built the trap he walked into. My dad stared at his shoes. I stared at the door the jurors had disappeared behind, and waited to see if 12 strangers would recognize what I finally had. That this wasn't a family misunderstanding at all. It was a crime. The jury was out for less than 2 hours, but it felt like an entire winter in Alaska all over again. I watched the clock, listened to the hum of the hallway, tried not to think about every voicemail from relatives telling me I could still call this off. When the bailiff finally opened the courtroom door and announced that the jury had reached a verdict, my legs felt heavier than when I'd climbed off the research boat. We all stood as they filed back in, 12 faces I suddenly knew better than some of my own family. The foreperson handed the form to the clerk, who read in a clear, steady voice that didn't shake on any of the counts. Guilty on real estate fraud, guilty on grand theft, guilty on forgery, guilty, guilty. The words bounced around the courtroom like they were hitting every wall before landing on my brother. Logan stood frozen, eyes locked straight ahead, jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. My dad let out a sound behind me that was somewhere between a sigh and a sob. I just exhaled. Not triumph, not joy, just air I'd been holding in since the moment I heard 5 million for the beach house on a shaky Wi-Fi connection in the middle of the ocean. Sentencing came a few weeks later. Enough time for both of us to feel the weight of what guilty actually meant. The courtroom was less crowded that day. Fewer cameras, less spectacle. The Parkers sat on one side of the aisle. My dad sat on the other. I sat in the middle. The one person everyone seemed to have an opinion about. Before the judge pronounced the sentence, she allowed victim input statements. Daniel Parker stood and told the court how $5 million wasn't an abstract number to him. It was decades of early mornings and late nights, a lifetime of saying no to little luxuries so he and his wife could one day say yes to a view of the ocean. He talked about the shame of feeling foolish, of wondering how he'd missed the obvious red flags. His wife described sleepless nights and doctor's visits, and the way their dream house still made her stomach twist whenever she drove past it. Then it was my turn. I didn't read from a book. I just told Judge Brooks the truth. I said that my brother hadn't just taken money or property. He had weaponized my absence and my work and my grandmother's trust. He had turned my name into a tool to strip other people of what they'd earned. I told her that if this case stayed a family matter, then every person who ever got conned by a charming relative would keep being told to swallow it for the sake of peace. When I finished, my dad stood up, hands shaking, and asked the judge for mercy. He talked about Logan as a little He didn't look at me. Judge Naomi Brooks listened to all of it, her expression calm but not cold. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the kind of authority that made everyone sit a little straighter. She went down the list. The amount of money involved, the planning, the forged documents, the impact on the Parkers, on Caleb, on Mrs. Martinez, on me. She mentioned the psychological evaluation that described Logan's gambling disorder and narcissistic traits, not as an excuse, but as context for why he kept chasing risk even as the consequences closed in. Mr. Hayes, she said, you did not make a single bad decision in a moment of panic. You made a series of deliberate choices over months. You exploited the trust of your neighbors, your partners, and your own family. You stood to gain $5 million from a property you had no legal right to sell and have shown very little genuine remorse. Meaning hearts. Then she sentenced him to 12 years in state prison with mandatory restitution to the Parkers and other victims, and strict conditions on any future involvement in financial or real estate matters when he eventually got out. I heard my dad gasp softly. Logan whipped his head toward me like I had personally handed the judge the gun, his eyes burning with a hatred I'd never seen directed at me before. Later, I learned the details of how the money would shake out. The sale was voided. The title officially restored in my name. Most of the $5 million was still sitting in escrow, ready to be wired back to the Parkers, but roughly $800,000 had vanished into Logan's spree. Vegas markets, luxury car payments, crypto transfers that would take years to unpick. Other people started coming forward too. A man who'd sunk his small inheritance into one of Logan's can't-miss coin offerings. A woman who entrusted him with a chunk of her retirement because he'd thrown around words like guaranteed return and inside track. The district attorney's office opened additional investigations. My family text friends meanwhile looked like a war zone. One aunt called me a hero. Another said I'd destroyed my father. My dad left a voicemail one night with broken, saying he couldn't sleep thinking about his son in his cell, that he wished I'd found another way. I didn't have an answer for him, because there wasn't another way that didn't end with him getting hurt. A month after sentencing, I made the drive out to the prison. I didn't go because I missed my brother. I went because I needed to see, with my own eyes, what my choice had done, whether there was any part of him that understood why I'd made it. The visiting room was all hard surfaces and fluorescent lights, a low buzz of conversations that sounded like static. When Logan walked in wearing a state-issued uniform instead of a tailored jacket, he still tried to carry himself like the most important person in the room. He sat down across from me, picked up the phone on his side of the glass, and didn't bother with hello. You could have stopped this, he said. One word from you, and they would have backed off. You chose strangers over your own brother. I stared at him through the smudged glass and thought about the Parkers shaking hands, about Caleb's ruined career, about Mrs. Martinez's letter, about Jasmine hitting play on that recording. No, I said, I chose the truth over your lies, and I chose not to let you use my name to hurt anyone else. He scoffed, leaned back. It was just a house, Megan. You weren't even living there. You've got your job, your projects. I was finally getting ahead. She should have left it to me else. She didn't. I said quietly. She trusted me then. And you took that trust and tried to cash it out. He shook his head, still convinced the universe owed him more than it ever gave me. There was no apology, no moment of clarity, just more resentment. When the guard signaled that visiting time was up, I stood. You're the one who put yourself here, I told him. I just stopped pretending you weren't dangerous. Walking back through the security gates, leaving him behind in a building full of bad decisions and hard consequences, I felt something I hadn't in months. Space. Not happiness. Not closure. Not yet. But space to imagine a future where my grandmother's house wasn't a crime scene or a recording studio, where it to do something more monumental what my brother tried to do. I drove back toward the truck on the windows cracked, salt air cutting through the stale smell of everything, and wondered what to do with a home that had survived both scam and trial. I knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, it wasn't going to be another race in the park.